This was the lineup that would change everything. Leslie West on guitar and vocals, Felix Pappalardi on bass and vocals, Steve Knight on keyboards, Corky Lang on drums. Their sound was unlike anything on the radio. It was heavier than Led Zeppelin, dirtier than Cream, more physical than anything most people had experienced. The bass rumbled through your chest. The guitar cut through walls. The drums hit like sledgehammers. Climbing hit number 17 on the Billboard 200 in 1970. Powered by Mississippi Queen. Mississippi Queen reached number 21 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song featured West's burly yowl and guitar blasts and drummer Corky Lang's completely unironic cowbell. It was 2.5 minutes of boisterous bliss. It became one of the first mainstream hard rock anthems. It's still used in films, TV, and video games decades later. Critics called them primitive. Fans called them essential. August 16, 1969. Max Yasgur's farm, Bethel, New York. It was Saturday about 9 p.m. Leslie West hired their own helicopter because they had heard it would be chaos getting up there. When they flew over in the helicopter, it felt like something out of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. West opened the first aid kit and took out an amyl nitrite popper, looked out at that crowd, and almost fell out of the helicopter. West thought he had the most amplifiers of anybody there. That stage, that setting, was some kind of natural amphitheater. The band kicked off their performance with a tight rendition of Blood of the Sun. It was raw. It was overwhelming. It worked. Mountain's performance was not included in the 1970 Woodstock documentary or soundtrack album, but that doesn't seem to have affected their rise to stardom. Versions of Blood of the Sun and Theme for an Imaginary Western, recorded post-Woodstock, were released on the 1971 album Woodstock 2. This was followed by another successful album, Nantucket Sleigh Ride, in 1971. The album hit number 16 on the Billboard 200. Darker and more complex than Climbing, it reflected growing internal tension. The title track symbolized Mountain's impending collapse, a metaphor for being dragged to destruction by something powerful you couldn't escape. Mountain gained a large following among fellow musicians and fans, and is often credited with being one of the early influencers of heavy metal. They influenced Kiss, Van Halen, Thin Lizzy, and the entire early metal and stoner rock scenes. In 2011, Eddie Van Halen told Rolling Stone that West and Deep Purple's Ritchie Blackmore were among his biggest influences, saying, "Leslie West has this incredible tone in Mountain." But beneath this triumph, something dark was growing. When Mountain started out, Felix and Gail were a brilliant creative team. Gail contributed lyrics to many Mountain songs, and her artwork appears on album covers including Climbing, Nantucket Sleigh Ride, Flowers of Evil, and Mountain Live. The road goes ever on. But as time went on, there was more to the relationship than met the eye. Felix Pappalardi wanted more sophistication and orchestration. Leslie West preferred raw, loud, blues-based rock. Disputes over songwriting credits and royalties began to simmer. Drug use increased during heavy touring. Exhaustion from nonstop shows in 1970 to 71 began taking its toll, and the machine kept rolling faster than any of them could control. Flowers of Evil, November 1971. This was it. The apex. Flowers of Evil was released just 10 months after Nantucket Sleigh Ride, and it began to clearly show the strain of the pace the band had been keeping up since July 1969. Half of it consisted of lackluster studio originals, while the other half was a live medley and a concert version of Mississippi Queen. They were becoming what every great band fears, a machine pumping out product instead of art. They were untouchable commercially. Mountain had become one of the biggest live acts in America. They were playing arenas. They were matching the volume of bands twice their size. They were pioneering a sound that would define the next decade of rock music. But what fans didn't see was the physical destruction happening behind the smiles. Pappalardi was forced to retire from performing because of partial hearing loss, a result of Mountain's loud concerts. Every show was slowly making him deaf. The very thing that defined Mountain their crushing, ear-splitting volume, was destroying the man who held them together musically. Leslie West wanted to stay heavy, stay bluesy, stay raw. Felix Pappalardi wanted complexity, arrangement, production value. Both parties' drug use and extramarital affairs were spiraling. Corky Laing tried to mediate, trying to hold two opposite visions together with rhythm and patience. And that's where the trouble began. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to subscribe. In 1971, Felix Pappalardi quit the band. He wasn't just the bassist, he was the producer, the arranger, the link between heavy rock and musical structure. Without him, Mountain lost its center of gravity. Mountain disbanded in February 1972 after a tour of the UK. West cited a combination of drug abuse within the band and Pappalardi's road weariness and burgeoning hearing impairment as primary factors. Most bands would have ended there, but Mountain had something the industry didn't understand yet, an identity that was bigger than its members. A live album, Mountain Live, The Road Goes Ever On, was issued in April 1972. It had only 4 cuts on it, all of them characterized by extended solos. Lackluster sales and reviews were inevitable. The impression of a band running on empty was reinforced. Pappalardi returned to production, while West and Laing stayed close to their hard rock roots and teamed up with ex-Cream bassist Jack Bruce as West, Bruce, and Laing. This hard rock power trio cut a brief but memorable path across the musical landscape in the early to mid-70s. Later in 1973, Mountain was back together, West and Pappalardi reactivating the band with Bob Mann on keyboards and guitar and Alan Schwartzberg on drums for a tour of Japan. This resulted in the live double LP Twin Peaks, 1974, a much better representation of the group's concert sound, including a 32-minute version of Nantucket Sleigh Ride. They streamlined, they adapted, they survived. During 1974, West, Laing, and Pappalardi revived Mountain again to record a studio LP avalanche. It was competent, it was professional, it was everything Mountain used to mock, and it didn't work. The album failed to match earlier success, but beneath the chart positions, the real cost was building. Pappalardi's partial deafness was worsening, drug use was accelerating, the creative chemistry that had made Climbing and Nantucket Sleigh Ride work was gone, replaced by obligation and nostalgia. The tide was beginning to turn. 1974 to 1975. The end was coming. Mountain disbanded again in 1975. West wanted to return to his blues roots. Pappalardi's hearing was deteriorating rapidly. The loud concerts that had made them famous were now physically impossible for their bassist to endure. Laing was caught in the middle, watching two men he respected destroy themselves and each other. Then came the years in the wilderness. Felix Pappalardi retired from music for a time to deal with a life-threatening drug addiction. In the mid-70s, West moved to Milwaukee to kick a heroin habit. In a 1990 interview, he said it had been 10 years since he had stopped fooling with narcotics. After pursuing separate musical paths for almost a decade, West and Laing reunited Mountain, recruiting Miller Anderson, ex-Savoy Brown and Keith Hartley, on bass in 1981. Felix Pappalardi didn't join. He couldn't. His hearing was too far gone. After Anderson had travel visa troubles, he was replaced in 1984 by Mark Clark, and the group recorded Go For Your Life in March 1985. This lineup played at the Nebworth Fair on June 22, 1985, alongside Mama's Boys Blackfoot, Meatloaf, Scorpions, Deep Purple, and others. Go For Your Life was dedicated to Pappalardi's memory. Pappalardi's memory, not his participation. Because by 1985, Felix Pappalardi had been dead for 2 years. The lowest moment came on April 17, 1983. Things took a turn for the fatal on April 12, 1983, when 43-year-old Pappalardi confessed his latest affair to his wife in their New York apartment. He had fallen in love with Valerie Marians, a young singer-songwriter. The one big mistake Felix made was telling Gail about it. On the night of April 17, 1983, he was shot dead by Gail in their apartment at 30 Waterside Plaza, on Manhattan's Upper East Side in New York City. She shot him once in the neck with a .38 caliber Derringer at around 6 a.m. It was a Derringer he had given her as a gift a few months previously. Her story was that she didn't know how to shoot a gun, and while he was teaching her, it went off by accident. Neighbors heard loud arguing that night. A blood test showed Gail had about 40 Percodan inside her. She was out of her mind. If it was an accident, what would be the first call you'd make? The emergency services, the police, or the lawyer? Well, Gail called her lawyer. The police had her telephone call records. Operators received a call from Papalardi's wife, Gail, 43, about 6 a.m. On the transcript of the 911 call, Gail Collins Papalardi said, "I killed my husband." The framed wedding certificate that had hung over the bed was found ripped to pieces. Mrs. Papalardi swore that the destruction of the wedding certificate was another accident, claiming Papalardi tore it when he was clearing a desk of old papers. It was shocking. It was brutal. It was over. Papalardi was charged with second-degree murder. The jury acquitted her of second-degree murder and manslaughter, but found her guilty of criminally negligent homicide. The judge seemed annoyed by the verdict, reminding jurors, she called her attorney instead of calling for help. She was concerned with her own well-being. She served 2 years of a 4-year sentence. Felix Albert Papalardi Jr. was born December 30th, 1939, and died April 17th, 1983. He was 43. The man who had produced Cream's greatest albums, who had created Mountain Sound, who had shaped early heavy metal, was gone. He is interred next to his mother at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, New York City. He died without ever receiving the reunion he might have deserved. He died in a pool of blood on his own bed, shot by the woman he'd married, the woman who'd written his lyrics and painted his album covers. Mountain Without Papalardi had worked in the early 70s because there was still creative fire. Mountain Without Papalardi in the 80s just felt hollow. The band that had played Woodstock with only 3 prior gigs, that had created Mississippi Queen, that had pioneered heavy metal, couldn't survive the loss of its musical architect and the horror of how he died. By 1983, Mountain was over. Where they went next, that tells you everything about what Mountain had become. Leslie West continued his solo career. He released albums throughout the years, including The Great Fatsby in 1975, which featured a guest appearance by Mick Jagger on guitar. He was a regular on Howard Stern's radio show, recorded solo records, and took a few stabs at acting, including in 1986's The Money Pit. In the mid-'80s, he was diagnosed with diabetes. In 2011, West's lower right leg had to be amputated due to complications from his diabetes. Just 2 days after the amputation, West called into the Howard Stern show from his hospital bed, joking, "I've just got to figure out how to play the guitar with one foot." Less than a year after the amputation, West was back to performing on stage, a testament to his tenacity. West went into cardiac arrest on December 21, 2020, and was rushed to a hospital in nearby Palm Coast, Florida, where he never regained consciousness. Leslie West died on December 23, 2020. He was 75. Many celebrities and rock musicians paid tribute to West on his death, including Howard Stern, Brian May, Peter Frampton, Joe Satriani, and Slash. Corky Lang continued to tour with various versions of Mountain after West's death. In 2021, Corky Lang's Mountain resumed touring with a lineup of Lying, drums, vocals, Joe Venti, bass vocals, and Richie Scarlett, guitar, keyboards. Corky Lang died on January 26, 2021. Steve Knight returned to jazz after Mountain's breakup. He enjoyed a long career as a sound engineer, author, songwriter, and session player, settling in Woodstock, New York, and serving 2 terms on the Woodstock Town Board. Steve Knight died on January 19, 2013. Felix Papalardi never got to see any reunion. Gail Collins was paroled in 1985 after serving half of her 4-year sentence, and disappeared from sight. She had been going by her middle name, Delta. Papalardi's ex-wife, Gail Collins, has been found dead in a Mexican village where she had apparently lived as a recluse while undergoing experimental cancer treatments. She was discovered by her landlord on December 6, 2013. Collins was 72 at the time of her passing, and for years, Mountain was just a memory. But the story wasn't over. Mountain went dormant again until 1992, when West and Lang teamed up once again and brought in Richie Scarlett to round out the lineup. Multiple reunion attempts followed with rotating lineups. Scarlett was replaced with Randy Coven in 1993. Various bassists and keyboardists cycled through. But Felix Pappalardi never returned. He couldn't. He was dead. The reunions were modest successes at best. Festival appearances, small tours, nostalgic gigs for aging fans. For a moment, it felt like healing, but it wasn't the same. It could never be the same. The real war wasn't about who showed up. It was about legacy. Decades later, the battle became about what Mountain meant. Was it the Woodstock performance that introduced them to the world? Was it climbing and Mississippi Queen that defined them? Was it Nantucket sleigh ride's darkness and complexity? Was it the original lineup that built their reputation? Or was it all of them and none of them at the same time? Today, Mountain exists only as a catalog. Leslie West is dead. Felix Pappalardi is dead. Corky Lang is dead. Steve Knight is dead. All original members are now deceased. They are best known for their 1970 smash hit song, Mississippi Queen, which remains a staple of classic rock radio. The beginning of the live recording of their song, Long Red, has become one of the most sampled drum breaks in hip-hop, sampled in over 700 songs by artists such as EPMD, Pete Rock and CL Smooth, A Tribe Called Quest, Nas, and Kanye West. They sold millions of records. They pioneered heavy metal and hard rock. They influenced Kiss, Van Halen, Thin Lizzy, and countless others. They played Woodstock with only 3 prior gigs. They survived breakups, drug addiction, hearing loss, and creative destruction. But success created legends and corpses. Mountain proved that you can play Woodstock in front of 500,000 people, create one of the most iconic riffs in rock history, influence the entire heavy metal genre, and still lose everything that mattered. They became one of the loudest bands in the world by sacrificing their hearing, their health, and their sanity. And when the volume stopped, all that was left was deafness, addiction, and a murder that ended any possibility of reconciliation. The crushing sound hid the physical destruction. The platinum albums hid the drug abuse. The stadium shows hid the fact that their bassist was slowly going deaf from the very thing that made them famous. The creative partnership between Felix and Gail hid a toxic relationship built on drugs, infidelity, and control that would end with a .38 caliber Derringer and a 6 a.m. phone call to a lawyer instead of emergency services. The music survived. The band didn't. And now, decades later, all 4 original members are gone. There are no reunions left, no reconciliations possible, just a catalog of crushing riffs and thunderous drums that influenced generations of musicians who came after. Mountain didn't collapse because the audience left. They collapsed because the thing that made them great, their ear-splitting, bone-shaking volume, literally destroyed them. Because winning came at the cost of hearing, health, and ultimately life itself. What part of this story hits you the hardest? Felix Pappalardi being shot by his wife after confessing his affair? Leslie West losing his leg to diabetes but still performing? The fact that Mountain's loudness caused the very deafness that ended Pappalardi's career? Did Mountain lose their soul when Pappalardi left in 1971? Or did they just evolve into something different? Could Mountain have survived if Pappalardi's hearing had held out? Did you see them live? Early power trio era, the reunions in the 80s and 90s, or one of Leslie West's final shows? Drop your memories and opinions below. And if this story fascinated you, hit like and subscribe because the rise and fall of legends never gets old. Rock history is full of bands that conquered the world and then watched it crumble. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.